Welcome to the February 18th AI update for the AIX Higher Ed podcast. And again, we're focusing on really one particular issue. And in this case, AI and economic restructuring, navigating the great transition, and really drawing from some of the work that Stefan's been including in the blog and some recent stories and updates that we really think are worth your attention.
And, there's, if you watch the most recent Moonshots podcast, which was recorded in about 24 hours before this one, Dr. Alex Wisner-Gross, who's always, kind of pushing the frontier of the AI, said knowledge work is cooked, right? And he even said, we didn't include the full quote here. He says, cooked. And he says, emphasis for twice, it's very cooked. And he says, now that we have, Claude Sonnet 4.6 just came out. I can't even remember the days anymore. I think it was yesterday, 4.6, and it's able to do a lot more financial analysis and stuff like that for a lot less, cost. So it has like marginally greater capabilities in some areas, than Claude Opus 4.6, but the cost is substantially lower. He's just saying, hey, I've been right all along. We all like to say I've been right all along. And he's talking about how the knowledge work is cooked.
There are also more updates from, including Microsoft's VP of AI, their timeline for major knowledge work disruption, estimated to be 12 and 18 months. And related to that is an article that if you haven't seen it, you should probably check it out. Matt Schumer's essay that he first posted on X, and it's on LinkedIn, has 84 million views at this point. And it really has resonated with a lot of people, talking about how AI is replacing people creating code. His own work as a technologist has really been taken away and being done by the AI that he's supervising. And he's talking about how this is going to have an effect on other professions. One of the reasons why I think it's resonating with so many people is that it really appeals to people in the industry or been using AI because they've been seeing this happening. And he starts with kind of a story about how he's always had kind of polite conversation with people that aren't in the industry about what's happening. And he feels like it's really time for them to be aware of some of the changes and just how capable these tools are. I think what he's pointing to is something that most of you are probably seeing as well. And that is we've seen a real change over the last couple of months. Things are only speeding up and the capabilities are only getting greater.
Yeah. And, it doesn't mean the end of, all work. Certainly not even the end of all knowledge work. Could comment on that a little bit, but, it's going to decline. But there's kind of going to be a shift towards more physical labor. More people are going to have to do physical labor because robotics, especially in the United States, not so much in China, but in the United States and most other countries, substantially behind, and it just takes longer to transition, right? Like most people have computers, laptops. People can go kind of into companies and help them adapt to AI. They can build out the agents. That still takes time, but it takes a longer time. We barely have any robots in the U.S., let alone humanoid robots that could navigate all these spaces. So, over the next probably 5 to 10 years, physical labor is probably demand for it maybe increase as we build out some of this stuff, but we'll certainly still be there.
So when we look at the larger shift in the labor market, there's some challenges and then some responses that we're seeing and some really recent articles talking about how people are responding. I'll start off talking about some of the challenges and then Stefan can talk about some of the responses. Certainly we're seeing that AI is automating knowledge work much faster than expected. And it's something that many people could see that was coming, but it's still surprising once you see it starting to speed up. And that is going through work like Claude Code, Claude Cowork with some of the other advanced models, really providing greater capabilities than people thought were going to come that fast. There's also a shift from knowledge work and those types of jobs to more physical labor. And we'll see that as part of the response as Stefan gets into it. And the other thing that's important about this is that it's really not the labor market that most middle and upper class students were expecting and what they were really planning for or ready for. And so it's catching people unawares. And I think that they're really having a hard time kind of coming to grips with how different this kind of labor market disruption is likely to be. Physical labor, as Stefan was mentioning, jobs will probably hold on until robotics catches up. And as he also noted, the U.S. is far behind China in robotics development, so it'll probably take a little longer before we get to that point. But we do see that coming. And when you see announcements from Elon Musk saying that Tesla was going to stop production of some of its cars, the Model S and the Model X, so that they could turn the Fremont plant into a plant just to build humanoid robots, then you see that there really is an impetus for this. And he wants to start creating 1 million a year. at some point. Even if it's a small fraction of that, we're going to start seeing more humanoid robots that once they're trained and they're capable are going to be able to take over a lot of the other labor work that some people were expecting to do themselves.
And just to pick up on that in the transition next part, there's an article that came out today, February 18th in The Atlantic, that's talking about what you were just referencing, that most workers, kids, going into entry-level jobs, they weren't expecting to do labor. They weren't expecting to be physical laborers. They're expecting to, knowledge work, knowledge labor. But there's just fewer of those jobs available, and that's why we're seeing a higher unemployment rate, I think, among college grads and in the general population. Because the general population, they're kind of more willing, expecting to do those types of jobs, whereas others are not. But it's kind of shifting, and these things, I think the way they get articulated, it's like all or nothing. It's not like everybody's abandoning the 4-year degree for the 2-year degree or something. But we're starting to see trends. We have more and more students opting for 2-year degrees. And this makes a lot of sense, right? If you think, okay, well, I'm going to go to college next year, then in 4 years, I'm going to get this degree. And depending on where you go or how willing the department is to change and adapt to the AI era, you could have graduated with a degree with basically the same competencies that students are graduating with this year, which may just kind of be completely irrelevant in 4 years, at least with some 2-year type of degrees, that's going to be more heavier on certification, practical skills. You can see that like translating, right? Like the world's going to change a lot, but just probably not going to change that fast. And you do see the federal government like trying to, get behind this. I mean, it's giving $65 million to community colleges, which typically have, 2-year type degree programs and certifications to, kind of get better connected to the labor market. So we're definitely kind of seeing that. But, people are also talking about larger changes, right? Like beyond, is the physical labor market going to be able to absorb like all the knowledge workers? Probably not. And maybe not for a long time, and certainly not when we have more robotics. Like Vinod Khosla is a big investor, one of the original investors in OpenAI. Someone who's been saying, in a few years we're going to have doctors, AI doctors that are certified. We've already seen this a little bit in Utah, where they can dispense prescription refills of certain drugs, so very limited, but still there. He's saying, look, we could at least cut income taxes to zero for some people, maybe under a certain income threshold or whatever. They cut their income taxes to zero, and then he says we should tax capital gains. Well, why? Because these companies, right, they're going to be very profitable. It's hard to do now, right? Because if you look at like OpenAI and you look at Anthropic, they're not profitable, right? So there's no profits to tax, and in the interim, you could tax Google, but it'd be interesting to see what happens. If they divided themselves up a little bit more, then into some new companies, some of those may not be taxable, but people play games. My point more generally is that people are really starting to think bigger picture. Other people are saying this is basically the end of capitalism because capitalism has been tied to labor, right? Even people who kind of very like free market, low government regulation, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get a job. Well, that's at least more persuasive when there are jobs to go get, right? Beyond the kind of the whole merits of the discussion that could go another direction. But it does assume that jobs are present, and this stuff's all happening very fast, and we need to be agile.
Now, there's some other important breakthroughs and developments that are certainly worthy of your attention because it gives some glimmers as to what's to come. The first one is dealing with some automation within the field, and this is a breakthrough that came with OpenAI's GPT, or not Chat GPT, but GPT 5.2 Pro. And what happened is they were working with some physics professors, and Harvard physicist Andy Strominger, who is known as one of the top physicists in the world, who a year ago was saying that he wasn't really sure there was going to be a role for AI within physics research. What they were able to get GPT 5.2 Pro to do is generate a novel conjecture about something that I knew nothing about before seeing reference to this, gluon scattering amplitudes. And it produced a formal proof over 12 hours. It was able to produce that, something that humans weren't able to do before that. It's really being described as, according to Strominger, as the first instance of AI solving a problem in his field that humans alone might never have reached by themselves. And it's really a good instance, an example of researchers being able to harness the power of an advanced tool like GPT 5.2 Pro to be able to do really advanced work.
And that's the one thing that, it's hard to like think it all through and what it all means. maybe provides a little bit of optimism in some way for knowledge work jobs, because, all right, well, we're gonna have all these new scientific discoveries and stuff. Like, people have to understand these things. They have to apply them into society, right? Like, so, I mean, that leaves me in some ways a little bit optimistic. But I've become more and more convinced by the idea that, scientific advances is just going to be really rapid. Like, others have said this. Dave Blendon was talking about it on the podcast. I know we hope to have a guest talk about this a little bit more, but, you can basically have millions of instances of AI agents that work 24 hours a day, all deployed to solve a problem. And of course, not just working individually, which has a huge impact, but working alone. Right. I mean, working together. Right. So you can think of them working alone, which would still produce a big impact, but also then working together. Just if, you had millions of people that could somehow coordinate magically to solve a problem and work 24 hours a day. And it does seem also, in other instances, again, in kind of closed loop systems like math, but they basically created some problems that there was like no training. They knew there was no training data for. They kind of made sure there was no training data present in the models that were used to solve the problems, and they were able to solve these math problems, right? So, that's not as advanced as, what it was able to do with the conjecture and the proof, but we see the AIs being able to operate outside of their training data to produce solutions to problems, which is, kind of always been something that people have been pushing on. And, I think this field automation, it gets important. It relates back to the jobs, you could say, in a negative way, because the AI can just do a lot of all this. We don't know what's going to happen to university scientific research, for example, or even a lot of government scientific research. It's going to be able to be done with a lot fewer researchers. But like I say, on the positive side, we're going to probably have to figure out how to apply all this.
The other thing that it was really striking to me reading about this is that the physicists working on this, they weren't dismayed by the idea that AI was able to do something that they weren't able to do. They were almost giddy with excitement because it meant that they had a new tool that they could apply to answer questions that they probably wouldn't have been able to answer on their own. And so it presents a really interesting scenario where we could view this as with great optimism, to think about it could solve problems we might not have. And maybe this is the other thing we'll see as we kind of shift an understanding of the market. It's not just that it can do the work that we are doing, and maybe it could end up doing all of the work that we're doing, but maybe there's another path forward where we can think about how we can work with it to be able to do more advanced work than we would have been able to do otherwise, and maybe even more advanced than if it's able to do work on its own. In this case, it was referred to as ASI, artificial superintelligence, very field specific. It's only within physics so far, but we can certainly expect that we're going to find other similar examples like this in other areas of research.
The other thing I, kind of want to talk about, there's so much more coming out about smart glasses, and when you call AR augmented reality, wearables, right? We have the glasses, Meta glasses are kind of really, hitting the market. Millions of users are wearing them. There are interesting stories on the news today because, and then, we'll unpack this some other day. I know in a book we're working on too, maybe we're going to talk about it, like social media, right? And the algorithms used to get kids in particular, but really anybody addicted to social media. And the Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, Meta, had to testify. And when he was going into court today, he was going in with these two Meta employees, and they both had the glasses on. And then I read some story, I think, that said the judge said, "Hey, no, you can't record through his glasses." But those glasses are going to be everywhere. They're going to be in schools. They're already in many schools. Many faculty are kind of unaware of this, but I know students in K-12 and universities are wearing these glasses. We have these pins. We have the watches. A friend of ours said they're coming into contact lenses, and there's a lot of companies, right, working on it. There's Meta and Apple and Samsung, from Korea, and Google. All these companies are racing to deploy this. And, there's an interesting, to reference the Moonshots podcast again, and I put this in the blog, there's a quote from Dave Blendon. It's like, well, at first there was social pressure not to wear these. Like Google came out with Google Glasses a long time ago, maybe like 8 years ago. And, you could film people and people thought that was weird and people were kind of stigmatized. But he says now, now when you have the glasses on, you just say, you can see overlays of everything. You just get all this instant information, which people can say is bad. But he's like, if you don't have it now, you're at a disadvantage. Yeah, you could be at a disadvantage in a social interaction. Maybe you go up to somebody at, some kind of a party or something, and, you have the option of it telling you everything about them. So maybe that's bad, but, he's just kind of pointing out that, you're going to have to wear these glasses, or you're not going to be, as intelligent as people around you.
And it's not just the peer pressure, I think, but there's also I think a developing understanding that what AI is going to be able to provide when we think about some of these tools and being able to build out other tools is that it allows for a layer of intelligence over everything. So this is quite explicitly providing a layer of intelligence. If with these glasses, you can see a layover in your augmented reality view of this is the name of the person I'm looking at. Here's all the information about their family and the work that they're doing. Or when I look at a car and I say I'd like more information, it can give me all the information on my glasses about that car if I want to buy it or I want to rent it. And you could do that with any product as well as other ideas so that you're interacting with the world in a very different way. It's not interact with the world and then go and research it or read about it or do something with it. Now, it is mediated in some interesting ways, and that could really change the way that we interact with the world. But I think that it's partly going to be because of peer pressure, but most of that peer pressure is going to come from a realization that this layer of intelligence that it's going to provide is indispensable. And it's going to be really hard for anybody to say they want to work without that. We will have such scenarios and situations where it'll be banned and won't be allowed. But I think we're going to see this happen more and more, and it's just going to be normalized.
It's going to get strange. There's those companies that do like the public record search, or, if you pay $30, you can, look. I imagine some of those people are going to sell right into the glasses, right? And you're going to have a subscription, and, I'll be able to walk up and, at least find out everything that's publicly available on and Rao, which I don't know. It's at least now you have to kind of go through the other step, right? But these are challenges society will face, and it's not just these kind of external devices, right? There's also kind of internal devices. All brain computer interfaces are not internal, just kind of evasive and non-evasive. But the point is that, there's been a lot of work done on kind of invasive, I should say, not evasive, invasive brain computer interfaces. And, they've done a lot of cool things, right? They've been able to, somebody maybe who can't be verbal, it can capture the thoughts in their heads and then put that out on text, and of course, convert that text to audio. They've been able to do it for people who can't see. Like, there's all these different kind of things, but how much kind of knowledge sharing is going to be kind of there? Are they going to be able to kind of through these waves or other technologies, essentially kind of push knowledge into you? That's just kind of getting wild to think about. But all kinds of investments, both in the U.S. and China, on these brain computer interfaces, which kind of further challenge this idea of, like, I think a lot of the challenges schools will face. They've talked now a lot about phones, right? But I think there are broader questions related to technologies, right? Like, a phone is really just kind of now, at least, right? A phone is like a mini version of a laptop. It can basically do anything a laptop to do. So, excuse me, you have questions of phones, a laptop, so the glasses, the pins, and pins are really going to be hard to regulate. I mean, somebody could just have like essentially a little pin disguised on their, some kind of a necklace, right? That creates the pin, and then of course brain computer interfaces. I mean, that's a whole other level of something to regulate.
There's a really interesting science fiction novel called Accelerando, where there's a reference to this, where a later generation, there's a discussion about the young people have brain computer interfaces and implants. And there's such a disparity and gap between their parents and them because they're thinking and processing things in very interesting, different ways that the parents aren't able to do. I'm just imagining what happens if you have a student that shows up for the SAT test and they have a brain computer interface or something that's internalized that allows them to access certain tools. Maybe because of accessibility challenges, we would allow it. Maybe we wouldn't. How does that get designated? And it's not going to only be for someone for whom has a sensory impairment. It's also then going to be used by people that otherwise don't have the accessibility concern or a quote justification, but are going to be able to use it to increase their own capabilities. And that's going to be a totally different world. And there's no way that we can even kind of fathom how we would regulate or deal with that. We wouldn't be able to regulate it. It's just going to become more normalized. That's
But,
a little
these are
further
broader
down.
questions, and they're going to, given the rate of technological change, they're going to push forward faster than we would otherwise think. Like, even a couple of years ago, I remember writing about these, and they work to a degree, but they're fairly kind of nascent, whereas now, like, they're kind of here. And, yeah, given the rate of advances and how much AI is aiding these advances, who knows, in a few years, we might have fully functional systems.
And when we get into a decision framework for educators, it's really important to start moving immediately. You can't just wait for consensus. We can't work through the same processes that we worked through before. And this isn't true only for education. It's really true for any sector of society. And Stefan shared an article with me earlier that was talking about some local communities resisting data centers and broader kind of response to AI. And a number of people saying, I don't understand why it's moving so fast. We really want it to slow down. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think there's certainly too much of a profit motive. There are concerns about national security. And even if you took those away, the research has developed to a point where even if you didn't have all of those same national security and profit motives driving it, the development of the technology is almost becoming self-recursive. It's very close to that. And it's going to continue to grow even without a big push from the outside. It will be hard to stop it. It would be hard to slow it down. So we need to be ready for it. And we can't just wait for consensus. That's no longer a viable strategy.
And some of these researchers, they won't really admit it. They'll be like, oh, well, it's the Chinese, or, we gotta save everybody's health. But, they're just like naturally curious people working on this whole life, and they want it to work. And we can say that's good or bad, but, that's the reality of it. So, kind of I had some ideas and, just kind of articulated them here, what to do immediately, right? It's like, well, start integrating it into some assignments. So, like, get students to start using it as a part of an assignment. Now you're going to have to change the assignment to a degree, right? Say, oh, go home and write your paper with AI. I mean, I guess you could do that once so they could understand, they could write their paper with AI, but that's kind of not really the point, right? We want them doing something additive. We want them thinking with it, helping them research, put ideas together, some kind of a larger project, right? And then in the near term, right? Like, and this is just kind of, okay, well, how can we align with the labor market? It's trickier, right? Because the labor market is going to change, but we can see there's, I don't think, I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to disagree with, Alex Wisner-Gross. I mean, he's just kind of immersed in all this stuff on a daily basis and has a much times 100 deeper understanding of technology than I do. But, it seems like all knowledge work is not going to go away. People are going to be entrepreneurs. People are going to sit at the top of this. People are going to be creative. Even people like Dario Amodei and the CEO of Klarna, who's really aggressively tried to kind of integrate it. So they're saying 30 to 50% decline in knowledge work. Not that that's not significant, right? But not that that's insignificant, I should say. But, it's not everything. It's not like there's going to be no knowledge work left. But okay, kind of think about how that now, but where are we going to direct the graduates, right? Where there's more labor, right? We're going to have to kind of direct people more into those types of things. Then if you want to share the last two.
Yeah. I think the other thing about this that, I think Dr. Alex Wisner-Gross really gets the technology better than we do. But there's another aspect of this that a societal layer that will probably interrupt some of that development. And some of it's going to be the political pushback. We're also getting ready for midterm elections. I think there's probably going to be a little bit more of a hesitancy for companies to engage in a lot of layoffs right before an election, especially when they're worried about who's going to be elected to then regulate the industry that they're dealing with. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of it kind of a little quieter, and some of the leaders not saying as much. We've already seen this a bit as more of the CEOs are listening to their PR folks saying, maybe don't talk as much about a loss of jobs because that's not something you want to be the poster child for. And also safety concerns that you've heard from a number of people that are advocates for the growth that don't want to be out in public because they are worried about their own personal safety. And we've seen stories like that too. So what complicates this is that not that the technology is not going to develop. I think it certainly is. How that gets distributed and dispersed and implemented, I think will be complicated by some political forces, some societal reactions, some other resistance points that we'll see. And then also it'll be driven by whatever the profit motive really is at that point. And so it'll kind of be in fits and bursts. I think there'll be a little bit of a stall. I think then it'll move very quickly. Unfortunately, I just don't think it's going to come with the kind of thoughtful long-term planning that we would like to see. So we need to do that ourselves, especially in our classrooms.
Yeah, I wish I could get one of these PR jobs because these people get paid pretty well, and then you can give them great advice like, hey, don't talk about how you're going to eliminate all your employees. That's not going to go over so well with the public. But it's just kind of in the medium term, right? Develop, and I like this cross-disciplinary AI influence requirements, and I'm seeing this a lot. What people are writing about it's more kind of applied AI, right? It's just knowledge. You can also call it knowledge amplification, right? Like whatever it is you're going to graduate with, how can you use AI to kind of amplify that, what you're going to do it, how are you going to apply it, right? And we're seeing a lot of that with kind of applied AI because, everybody's, in order to kind of have an AI major, it would probably be primarily technical, right? And then, it seems there are a limited number of people that are needed at the very top of this. So that would be I guess all of a sudden you had millions of people with, basically machine learning type degrees. Like I don't, might probably become pretty hard to get a job in that at least 4 or 5 years out, right? So we don't want everyone to go in that direction. We want people to go in kind of applied or amplified AI. And then, just kind of dealing with uncertainty. And I think this is one thing that's kind of hard for a lot of people, especially faculty who, have been teaching for a while. They've been teaching the same courses or a similar number of courses, a similar set of courses. The departments had like similar courses. Maybe adding a new course was like a huge thing that kind of took a couple of years and had to go through committees to get approved. And, all these types of things, people kind of generally thought that would work. Once in a while, something went away and something got added. But we're going to have a lot of kind of new things and try it. And it's not all going to succeed in terms of kind of the objective of helping people get employed. But I also think this employment thing, I kind of am on the side of like university kind of been underestimating the importance of employment, especially given that students have to pay for it and not often have to borrow money to attend. But given how it seems unstable the job market may become, and how uncertain students are, right? Like a lot of young people now are uncertain that they're going to get a job, right? Or at least a decent paying job. And they show up on campus and you're like, well, I'm not here to help you get a job. I mean, that's just going to add to their, to their own anxieties. A minimum amount of, financial safety or security, at least a minimum amount is necessary for you to be a free thinker, a critical thinker, to kind of support your own intellectual development. So I hope faculty kind of really embrace the uncertainty in terms of, and kind of realize the importance of, it may be the case that the greatest challenge young people face, no matter how hard they work or what major they pursue, will be finding stable employment. In fact, most people say that even if they find employment, it won't be stable. So if we want to think too, even just from the lens of our students' own mental health, this is something we can really do, or at least put our best foot forward. It's not always going to work, but put our best foot forward to help them in that regard.
So when we think about some key takeaways and really kind of summing up what we've been talking about in this episode, we are looking at an acceleration of knowledge work automation that's really occurring faster than anticipated. And many experts, including, as we mentioned, the Microsoft VP for AI, saying maybe on a 12 to 18-month horizon. Some are saying it'll be even faster. Certainly the capabilities will be there very quickly. How that gets dispersed and implemented is another question, but it will be there. And that's when I think it's possible for companies to start thinking about how they're going to be implementing it. And that's only a year or two away.
Yeah. So, it's just, we all have to kind of, we've talked about shift to other types of labor. That's something we're also going to help students with mentally, right? I know when we grow up, nobody pushed us to do, physical work, at least me, right? Maybe they thought that was hopeless, but it's not something you were really kind of pushed into, right? And, I was saying there's these advances, scientific breakthroughs. We have super intelligence in some areas, the guy posted, hey, this is ASI. It's like, well, only in your area. Maybe that physicist is really focused on physics, not across the board. Though, these kind of other things, right? These other technologies like the smart glasses and stuff is going to allow us to take advantage of all this. Like we talked about applying it. That's a good way, right? Have your glasses on. Education really got to it's got to put its foot on the gas. Like I kind of feel so. It's like, well, education is just kind of there, and there's AI, there's swirl like all around it. And as I said in the debate we did, choosing not to do anything is a choice. People are afraid, and this question came up in the debate. Well, we got to do these experiments on the kids. We don't really know, if this stuff's going to work. The status quo is an experiment. we don't know what we're doing, at least beyond kind of the early years of schooling. We don't know that what we're doing and teaching kids and how we're preparing them is going to prepare them for this AI world. We don't. It's an experiment. We just need more than one experiment. We can't just have the status quo as an experiment.
I was talking to parents and prospective students at an open house recently, and this last point that's at the very bottom, we really can't say with any certainty what a degree completed in 2030 will allow that student to be ready to do, because we don't know what that world is going to look like. We can really anticipate that it's going to be a very different world, very different job market, very different set of technologies than what we're used to now. We have to confront that. We have to be honest with ourselves and with our students about that. That doesn't mean that we're powerless. It just means that we need to be a little more forward thinking about providing the flexibility, an understanding about how they can prepare in different ways, and staying abreast of these developments so that we can bring that into the classroom and have those discussions. It can be difficult, challenging to be that vulnerable with students to say, I don't know. And I'm not as familiar with these technologies as you are either. But together as an academic community, you can engage in those discussions with your students. You can really help them start to see what's to come, and you can prepare them in a way that they wouldn't be prepared otherwise. And I think that there's a real positive message there, and there's certainly real opportunity. But it is important that we start acting immediately.
We'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you. Bye.